Our 3-year project was about to make us famous when my wife gave my premise position to a newbie of just 3 months. I smiled as I transferred my shares, knowing that without my connections, all they faced was collapse and debt. The project my wife had been waiting for 3 years is about to breach the deadline, and she promised me that if it was completed by the end of the year, she would promote me to vice president. But after I worked tirelessly to finish it, she promoted the male assistant who had been with the company for less than 3 months to vice president instead. Your abilities are impressive, but if it weren't for him negotiating, the project would have failed long ago. Everyone thought I would be jealous of the assistant, but instead of getting angry, I smiled and handed over my shares to the assistant. You are right, by the way, from now on you'll be the company's new shareholder. After all, no one knew that. The reason the project had been allowed to be delayed again and again was because the client was my father. Without my connections, the so-called big project would be nothing but a house of cards, and my wife would be unable to repay the loans, doomed to a life worse than death. Chapter 1. When I tossed the share transfer document to my wife's assistant, Ethan Bennett, everyone in the company was stunned. For 3 whole years, many had worked hard on this project, pushing their bodies to the limit, though I didn't have many shares. Once the project went live and the company went public, those shares could potentially skyrocket tenfold or even 100-fold, and I, Daniel Parker, so nonchalantly gave them up. These shares were worth far more than a vice president position. Everyone's eyes were glued to the share transfer document except for my wife, Parker, whose face turned ashen. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the anger. Daniel, if you are unhappy with my decision, you could have just said so directly. Here is no need for this behavior disrupting the company's atmosphere. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Disrupting the company's atmosphere. She sure knew how to put a label on things. Ever since she hired Ethan, I'd become a villain in her eyes. No matter what I said or did, I was always wrong. Now I had just handed Ethan a huge opportunity. Why wasn't she happy about it? What on earth was going through her mind? I was truly at a loss. Meanwhile, Ethan was clutching the share transfer document tightly, his greed flashing in his eyes before he quickly hid it. Then he lifted his head, feigning a look of deep concern. Daniel, are you upset because you weren't chosen as vice president and think Mrs. Parker is biased? Please don't misunderstand. Mrs. Parker doesn't think you are incapable. It's just that she heard you are erratic to alcohol, and as vice president, you'd need to attend social events and drink. She was worried it might harm your health. Everyone knows how hard you've worked on this project, and I, as a newcomer, definitely can't accept these shares. Please take them back. Although Ethan's words sounded nice, he showed no sign of handing over the document. Clearly, he wasn't willing to part with such a juicy prize. As for what he said, it was laughable. Only Av and I knew about my alcohol allergy. This was clearly a story they had already agreed on, and the idea that because I couldn't drink, they would let a newcomer with less than 3 months on the job take the vice president position. Anyone with half a brain would know there was something fishy going on here, but I couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. Instead, I patted Ethan on the shoulder, speaking earnestly. Ethan, no, Mr. Bennett, I am truly grateful for how you've considered my well-being. Having someone as thoughtful as you in the company makes me feel at ease. I even squeezed his shoulder to show my recognition and approval. At this, wife finally smiled in satisfaction. That's more like it. Of course, I won't treat you poorly, such an experienced employee. Later at Ethan's celebration dinner, I know you can't drink, and I didn't want to drag you into it, but since you've shown such understanding, you can come too. Seeing her act like she was doing me some huge favor, I nearly laughed in disbelief. She took the vice president position without a word, and now she was acting all nice. Thinking she could send me off with a dinner, I smiled with a fake grin and declined.